Emily brushed the snow off her coat as she entered the bustling local market. The aroma of freshly baked bread and spiced cider filled the air, mingling with the crisp scent of winter. She wandered through the stalls, admiring the vibrant colors of winter produce and handcrafted goods. Her eyes were drawn to a small booth tucked in the corner, almost hidden from view. On the wooden table, amidst a few modest bouquets, stood a single flower that took her breath away. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, a delicate bloom with frosted petals that shimmered under the dim winter light. It seemed to hold the essence of the season itself. "Isn't she a beauty?" The elderly vendor's voice broke her trance. "That's the Rosa do Inverno, the winter rose. Quite rare around these parts." Emily's curiosity was piqued. "Where did you find it?" The vendor smiled mysteriously. "A man up in the mountains grows them. Not many know about it." Her mind raced with questions. A flower that bloomed in the harshest of seasons? She had to learn more. As she left the market, the image of the winter rose lingered in her thoughts, its frosted petals a symbol of beauty and mystery. The following morning, Emily found herself packing a small bag with essentials. The thought of the winter rose had kept her up all night, and she knew she wouldn't rest until she uncovered its secrets. The journey to the mountains was not a simple one, but her determination outweighed any hesitations. The air grew colder as she ascended, her breath visible in the crisp winter air. Snow crunched under her boots, and the towering evergreens seemed to whisper ancient secrets. After a few hours of trekking, she finally reached a clearing. Nestled against the backdrop of the imposing mountain was a solitary cabin, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. She approached cautiously, her eyes scanning the area. The place was serene, almost otherworldly. Before she could knock, the door creaked open slightly, revealing a man with sharp, weathered features and piercing blue eyes. His gaze held hers, a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice deep and guarded. "I'm looking for the man who grows the winter rose," Emily said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. The man's expression softened slightly. "That would be me. Name's Ethan. I'm Emily," she introduced herself. "I saw one of your flowers at the market and couldn't resist coming to learn more." Ethan studied her for a moment before stepping aside. "Come in. It's too cold to stand out here." Inside, the cabin was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the harsh exterior. The scent of pine filled the air, and a fire crackled in the hearth. Ethan gestured for her to sit, his demeanor still somewhat reserved. As they talked, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Ethan, and the winter rose, than met the eye. Over the next few days, Emily made several trips to Ethan's cabin. With each visit, the walls between them seemed to crumble just a little more. She learned that Ethan had lived in solitude for years, tending to his rare plants and staying far from the noise of the world. Despite his reserved nature, she began to sense a quiet strength in him, a connection to the mountains and to the winter rose that went deeper than mere cultivation. One afternoon, as Emily sat by the fire, watching Ethan carefully tend to the plants that lined his walls, she couldn't hold back her curiosity any longer. "Ethan, what's the story behind the winter rose?" she asked, her voice soft but eager. "Why is it so rare? And why does it only bloom in winter?" Ethan paused for a moment, his fingers stilling on the delicate petals of a nearby plant. He seemed to consider her words carefully, as if weighing how much to reveal. "It's an old family secret," he said finally, his voice low. "The winter rose has been in my family for generations. My great-grandfather found the first one on these very mountains, buried beneath the snow. He believed it was a gift from nature, something magical. But he also believed it was tied to something darker." Emily leaned forward, sensing the gravity in his words. "Darker? What do you mean?" Ethan's eyes flickered with something unreadable. He cleared his throat and stood, moving to a shelf filled with old journals. He pulled down a leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. "It's a long story," he said, handing the book to Emily. "But you should read this. It tells the full tale. My family's history with the flower." Emily took the book, her fingers brushing against the worn cover. As she opened the pages, she began to read, captivated by the story of Ethan's ancestors, who had lived in harmony with nature, until a tragedy struck that forever linked the winter rose to their fate. The more Emily read, the more she felt the weight of the flower's significance. It wasn't just a rare botanical specimen, it was a symbol of something much more profound and possibly dangerous. But what was it that Ethan wasn't telling her? As the fire crackled in the hearth, Emily felt the strange sense that she was unraveling a mystery that had been buried for years. And as much as she was drawn to Ethan, there was something in his eyes that suggested he was still holding back. Days passed, and Emily continued to learn more about the winter rose and Ethan's past. She felt the weight of the mystery growing heavier with each revelation, but there was something else, something more immediate, that began to draw her attention. One crisp morning, as Emily was heading back to the village after another visit to Ethan's cabin, she passed the local cafe and overheard a conversation that stopped her in her tracks. The town's mayor and a group of businessmen were gathered at a table, discussing plans for the future of the mountain region. "They're planning to clear the land," she heard one of them say. "The developers want to build a resort up there. The area is perfect for it. Access to hiking trails, scenic views. We'll make a fortune." Emily's heart raced. She knew the area they were talking about, the very mountains where Ethan lived, where the winter rose grew. If the developers got their way, the delicate ecosystem that sustained the rare flower would be destroyed. She couldn't let that happen. That evening, Emily hurried to Ethan's cabin, breathless with urgency. He was standing near the window, gazing out at the snowy landscape as if he could sense something was wrong. "What's going on?" he asked, noticing the worry in her eyes. "There's a company planning to develop the land on the mountain," Emily explained, her voice tight with frustration. "They're going to build a resort, and they'll destroy everything. Your cabin, the plants, the winter rose." Ethan turned toward her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he seemed to be lost in thought, then he exhaled sharply, a flicker of anger flashing in his eyes. "I was afraid of this," he muttered, pacing across the room. "I've heard rumors, but I didn't want to believe them. This place has been in my family for generations. We can't let them tear it down." Emily felt her pulse quicken. "We have to stop them, Ethan. We can't just let them take everything." Ethan's gaze softened. "I know. But it's not going to be easy. They'll fight back hard." The two of them stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation sinking in. Emily was determined to do whatever it took to save the land, and the winter rose. But the battle would be far from simple. As they discussed their plan of action, a new resolve settled between them. Emily and Ethan weren't just fighting for a flower. They were fighting for the legacy of his family, for the mountain itself. And the stakes had never been higher. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of action. Emily and Ethan rallied the community, speaking to local environmental groups and spreading word about the developers' plans. Though many were skeptical at first, as the situation grew more urgent, more people began to join their cause. Ethan, usually a man of few words, became a leader in the fight to save the land. Emily found herself admiring not just his knowledge of the mountain, but the quiet strength he drew from his family's history. He was no longer the man she had first met, closed off and distant. With every passing day, he opened up a little more, and their bond deepened. But the fight was not without its challenges. The developers were powerful, with money and influence on their side. As the legal battles escalated, Emily and Ethan found themselves under pressure, not just from external forces but also from within themselves. Tension hung in the air, and late one evening, as they sat together by the fire, Emily looked at Ethan with a mixture of admiration and something more. "I never imagined I'd end up here," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Fighting for a flower. Fighting for you." Ethan met her gaze, his eyes softening. "It's not just a flower, Emily. It's part of who I am, who my family is. And it's part of us now too." Her heart fluttered at his words. The weight of their struggle seemed to melt away in that moment, replaced by something lighter, more intimate. Ethan took her hand in his, the warmth of his touch grounding her in the present. "I don't know what the future holds," he continued, his voice steady, "but I know I don't want to face it without you by my side." Emily's chest tightened with emotion. "I feel the same way, Ethan. No matter what happens, I want to be here, with you, and with the mountain. For the rose." Their lips met in a gentle kiss, a promise of something new, a renewal of life and love amid the chaos surrounding them. Days later, after a final hard-fought battle in court, the developers were forced to abandon their plans. The mountain and the winter rose were safe. As the first signs of spring began to appear, Emily and Ethan stood together in the quiet of the mountainside. The winter rose had withstood the harshest winter yet, its petals still glistening with frost, a symbol of resilience and hope. And as they stood hand in hand, Emily realized that her own heart had bloomed in the same way, stronger, braver, and more open than ever before. Together, they would continue to protect the land and the legacy of Ethan's family. But more than that, they would nurture the love that had grown between them, a love as enduring as the winter rose itself.